Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us to discuss the mechanics of the Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant. I want to start with some introductions. My name is Peter Voderberg, and I am the Chief of Broadband Ohio, a new division within the Development Services Agency. I have been a partner in this process, and I wanted to just say that the staff at both the Department of Education and the Management Council have worked tirelessly to create the application and review all of the submissions in such a short turnaround time. I am very impressed, and I wanted to introduce the rest of the team to recognize them for all of the hard work that they have done. The team includes Devin Babcock of the Governor's Office, Ed Weisenbach of the Department of Education, who is the statewide technology coordinator. He will be managing the award process, including budget and application approvals. Mike Edwards of the Department of Education is a member of the Unit of Field Relations team and will also be reviewing and approving your applications and budgets. Brian Jones of the Department of Education leads the Grant Administration Office. His staff is responsible for reviewing PCRs and FERs submitted through the CCIP. Aaron Rausch heads up the Office of Budget and School Funding at the Department of Education. Melissa Balaba of the Management Council managed the customer portal and support, and Michael Clyde of the Management Council did the actual development of the website and application form. And I want to say he was very patient and responsive as we made changes during the initial stages of application development. Without the Management Council, we would not have been able to get this grant out the door in the time frame in which we did. Additional members of the Department of Education team include Marsha Ward, a project management specialist in the implementation unit who helped shepherd us through the process and did a great job, I will say, and Lily Bartholomew, an administrative professional who will be assisting Ed and Mike as needed in order to review budgets and applications as quickly as possible as they are being submitted. So I wanted to say thank you for this amazing team, because without them, all of the work that we did to put this grant together and for these dollars would have gone to nothing. So they were amazing, they were super responsive, and I was extremely impressed by their professionalism and how hard they worked. So what we want to talk about today is the purpose of the Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant, the details of the application and awards to be made, allowable and unallowable expenses, information regarding the management of the grant, including how to request reimbursement, and the reporting requirements associated with the grant. Now, I want to be clear, we will not be taking live questions today. Instead, we ask that you send all of your questions to the crfconnect@education.ohio.gov email. The team will review all questions and update the frequently asked questions on the K-12 Help webpage dedicated to this grant. Expanding broadband and increasing connectivity is one of the top priorities of the DeWine Husted administration. They've been taking methodical approaches to the expansion of broadband since the beginning, including the creation of my office, Broadband Ohio. And as many of you know, the Lieutenant Governor has been championing expanding broadband throughout the state with Broadband Ohio and with Innovate Ohio. He's created a short video presentation that we would like to play for you now.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Governor John Husted, and I want to say congratulations to all of you on being grantees, being the award winners for the $50 million that we are distributing to help your students get access to high-speed internet so that they can be part of the educational opportunities that you are providing for them. This is a critical time. You're all going through difficult things. And we hope this will help support your mission. This will extend access to the internet to 121,000 students in their homes, to potentially another 650,000 based on the Wi-Fi network that we're helping to boost in our communities around the state. This is important. Education is essential to human development and to preparing these students for their futures. They can't afford to lose a month, a year, anytime, frankly. And your efforts are important to their success. It's important to the state of Ohio's success. And we're here to help. We value the partnership we have with you, and I wish you all great success. Hello, I'm Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you to the Lieutenant Governor and his team for those words in that video. Now, we all know in some areas of the state, like rural Appalachia and in some of our urban and suburban centers, there are no providers that can offer high-speed internet to the home. In other areas, families have no way to access the internet because they do not have a device or they can't afford it. This grant is helping communities tackle both of these issues in the short term. The purpose was to provide vulnerable student populations with connectivity solutions so that they could learn remotely during the pandemic. If you look at this map that I have on the screen here, you can see that there are some green areas which represent the areas that the providers have said that they cover, and the white areas are those areas that have no coverage at all, at 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload, which is the federal definition of high-speed broadband. So there are large geographic areas in the state that have no coverage. And we know that this grant is going to be a short-term solution, but wanted to make sure that we had something available so that students had a way to connect during the school year. The grant has, in essence, two requirements. The first is that it needs to be for vulnerable student populations. The second is that the grant be for connectivity purposes. These dollars are to be spent on devices or methods that allow students to connect to the internet, either in-home or through public Wi-Fi. For purposes of this grant, the vulnerable student population includes economically disadvantaged students, as defined for EMIS reporting, including students on free lunch, vulnerable children and youth as defined by the Ohio Department of Education, students who might have chronic conditions, and students who do not otherwise have access to the internet. All of you have already indicated which of these populations you are hoping to address in your application. We have had over 900 applications requesting more than $80 million in funding. If we could have, we would have funded all these projects to the full request, but due to the high demand, we are going to prorate the amount each awardee will be receiving. And I wanted to say we had a broad range of applications, with many applicants requesting the full amount of $250,000, while some asked for less than $1,000. Some grantees are using the money to offer students devices that connect to the internet through a cellular network. Others are offering to have the internet brought into the home. Other areas that have fewer providers are building public Wi-Fi or mobile Wi-Fi stations to make sure that students have a place to go to download homework and upload assignments. We were very impressed with how many applicants provided innovative solutions to bringing high-speed internet to their students. To make sure that those who asked for lower amounts did not receive cuts that would eliminate their ability to provide services to their community, a decision was made to create a floor. Awardees with approved amounts below the floor will receive the full amount they requested. Awardees with approved amounts over the floor will have the award prorated and receive a little over 60 cents on the dollar. The floor amount is $20,000. So for all of you that requested that amount or below, and their request was approved, you will be fully funded for your application. For those of you who have approved requests over that amount, you will receive the first $20,000 as a full award and then a proration on any dollars after. Now, I say approved amount because there were many applicants that put information in the other category for our team to review. Many of these requests contain items eligible for the grant and were approved. Others contained items that were not eligible for the grant, and as a result, we reduced the award for those applicants. Where the other category contained both eligible and ineligible items with a breakdown of cost for them, we reduced the award by the ineligible items only. Where the other category didn't break down the cost for the items and it contained both eligible and ineligible items, we reduced the award by the total amount requested in that category. When you look at your awards in the CCIP, you will see that there is a history log entry that will provide the reduced amount. For those of you that did not include anything in the other category, your awards were otherwise approved. We'll talk more about eligible and ineligible expenses later, but for now, let's discuss the process and timeline. From a process perspective, before any grant funds can flow, you will be uploading the PDF document of your initial application into the CCIP, as well as assigned assurances. You will enter a budget in the CCIP budget page. Also include any supporting documentation, whether that be purchase orders or contracts entered into by service providers. The timeline for this grant covers the period of July 1st through December 30th of 2020. Even though awards are being made in September, you may be reimbursed for eligible purchases that occurred after July 1st. However, no purchases prior to July 1st will be reimbursed. A notation providing a substantially approved date of July 1st, 2020 will be made in the CCIP history log for each awardee. Now, the grant is funded through federal CARES Act dollars, which is why there's a cutoff of December 30th for the expenditure of these funds. We've worked with the Office of Budget and Management and had numerous conversations about ways to be able to extend that date. But ultimately, the federal statute itself created that deadline, and as a result, we have the same one. Meeting this deadline means that you have to have the connectivity solution in hand and useful by December 30th. When you're working with your vendors and placing orders, make sure that the delivery date is before December 30th, or the purchase will not be eligible for reimbursement under the federal guidelines. Now, some of you have asked about delays in shipping, and the federal guidelines state that as long as the initial purchase order or contract specifies that delivery was scheduled before the December 30th deadline, it is still eligible for use of the funds from if a vendor fails to provide the item on time through no fault of you, the purchaser. From a mechanic's perspective, that also means that your FER for this project needs to be submitted by December 30th. We'll be discussing this in greater detail a little later on in this presentation, but I wanted to make clear that the final FER will be due by December 30th, 2020, and the obligation will need to be incurred prior to that date. To prove the obligation, you can provide an invoice, a copy of the contract, a purchase order, or even a cell service or in-home service bill. Now let's talk about eligible expenses. As for the expenses themselves, we want to take this opportunity to speak to what is eligible versus what is not. But before I do, I want to touch on the RFI for a brief moment. As most of you know, the Department of Administrative Services issued a request for information asking vendors to provide the best prices they have for K-12 programs, whether it be for services or devices or anything in between. To date, there are 36 responses with everything from hotspots and tablets, which are eligible, to AV equipment and HDMI cables, which are not. So 2 things to be aware of. First, just because it is on the RFI list does not make it automatically eligible for this grant. The RFI is broader than this grant, and we wanted to make sure that schools had a one-stop shop for the best pricing for technology equipment. It creates a ceiling for how much you might expect to have to pay for a product or a service, and allows you to negotiate with other vendors with the knowledge of what an appropriate price point should be. Second, you do not have to use the price list. The vendor's on that price list, or the price is on the price list. If a vendor offers you a better deal for an eligible product that is listed on the RFI, please, by all means, take it. Whether you use the RFI prices or vendors will have no impact on whether an item is eligible for reimbursement. They are 2 separate and distinct things. And one other thing to note, the restrictions on these dollars do not carry over into the other CARES dollars you receive from the federal government or from the state. Those dollars are separate and distinct from this grant. So you can use those dollars as long as they're eligible in whatever capacity you receive those dollars. You can use the RFI to spend other monies. So with that, let's talk about the eligible expenses. Eligible expenses include public Wi-Fi, mobile public Wi-Fi like hotspots placed on buses, in-home internet like getting Spectrum to someone's house, take-home hotspots, and cellular-enabled devices. Expenses incurred in acquiring this technology, including the cost of the device itself and the service to be able to provide the internet connectivity, is eligible. When it comes to public Wi-Fi, construction and installation costs are included. When it comes to mobile public Wi-Fi, installation is included. However, the cost of the vehicle that you are installing the mobile hotspots onto is not. You cannot use this money to buy a bus or a van for this project. Devices. When it comes to a device like a laptop or a tablet, it must be able to connect to the internet on its own. That means it must be a cellular-enabled device, and to be clear, the device must be associated with a plan to be eligible. It isn't enough that you have purchased a device that has the capability of being on a cellular network. It must be able to access the internet through a cellular connection when it is received by the student. If you purchased unlocked hotspots, tablets, or LTE-enabled laptops from one vendor, you must also provide information as to how those devices have been activated on an LTE or other cellular plan to be eligible. Again, the purpose of this grant is to provide connectivity to these students, not just with devices. And one final note on devices. They need to be given to students at a ratio of 1 device per student. If you are buying hotspots and cellular-enabled tablets, do not purchase more devices than you have students. We will be checking your invoices and purchase orders against your class counts to make sure that you are not going beyond the number of students you are currently teaching or are currently enrolled. Further, Remember that these devices are for students and not for faculty or staff. They are required to go to students that need them. With public Wi-Fi or mobile public Wi-Fi, we understand that it will benefit the entire community, but devices must be specifically for students. Now I want to talk a little bit about ineligible expenses, as we received many questions during the application period as to what can or isn't eligible for this grant. First, you cannot purchase tablets, laptops, or Chromebooks that can only access the internet through a Wi-Fi or wired connection. While those devices can reach the internet, they do not provide connectivity to children who lack internet access. For take-home devices, they need to be able to access the internet or provide direct access to the internet in the case of hotspots to the student. And as mentioned, it isn't enough that the device is cellular enabled. The device needs to have a cellular plan associated with it so that the student can access the internet once they receive the device. You cannot use these funds to purchase traditional cell phones, nor can you use these funds to purchase ancillary equipment like a mouse or a camera. To be eligible, the device must be able to connect directly to the internet without anything else. When it comes to in-home internet, installation and everything else is covered for the students, as is the service charge. However, ancillary equipment like additional Wi-Fi boosters for the home or a battery backup are not necessary for internet connection and are not eligible for these funds. And as a reminder, you cannot use these funds for payroll, even if it's for a person to help administer the program in your schools, nor can you use this money for any indirect cost of the program. You need to be able to show how these funds were expended to provide internet access to your students. I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Brian, who is going to cover the grant management process through the CCIP. Bear with us just for a moment, folks. We're having a quick technical difficulty. All right, while we are trying to fix our technical difficulty, I'm going to jump back in and provide as much of Brian's presentation as I can. So bear with me for just a moment. So many of you have already checked the CCIP and have not found your allocation. Allocations have not been loaded yet. You will receive your notice of award and CCIP allocation by close of business on Friday. The notice will provide the amount of the award. As we shared earlier, you must upload your original application, signed assurances, and complete the budget page in the CCIP. The budget grid breaks down where you plan to spend the funds into various categories: purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other. It is important to budget where the actual expense will be incurred. Salaries, fringe benefits, and indirect costs are not permitted with this grant. Once these pieces are reviewed and approved within the CCIP, you will have access to your grant funds. If your initial plans have changed due to the change in grant funds awarded or additional information received from vendors, please include a new plan with your application submission. You must still include the original application, but upload an additional document that contains your new plan. Once the application is submitted to ODE, your grant is in substantially approved status. And I see that Brian is with us, so I am going to hand it back over to him.
All right. Sorry, I don't know, just fell off there. Once the application is submitted to OD, your grant is substantially approved status, meaning you can begin to obligate the grant funds or spend charge against the grant. For this grant, we will make a history log entry taking your substantially approved date back to July 1, 2020. Remember, any expenses you made prior to July 1, regardless of whether they would have been an eligible expense or not, may not be reimbursed through this grant. Next slide, please. Once you receive the grant funds from the department, you are ready to liquidate or pay the expense. When you complete a project cash request or final expenditure report, both will validate the amounts with the budget you entered. If they don't match, the request cannot be processed or report filed. For all expenses, you should maintain proper support documentation. The CCIP has upload functionality. You should upload support documentation such as accounting reports, invoices, and even canceled checks you use to create that PCR. In addition, you should upload any agreements or contracts with the first PCR, so you wouldn't need to upload it multiple times, only once. If a solution for a single student includes multiple vendors, be sure to submit all associated items in the same PCR. For instance, if your reimbursement request is for cellular-enabled devices, you must submit documentation of the corresponding cellular service plan in the same request. Your project cash request will be verified against your original grant application, as well as your student count. If your purchases do not match the original solution plan, your request will not be processed. In addition, requests that indicate more than one student solution for hotspots or cellular-enabled devices with the cellular plan will not be approved. In other words, if you have a student count of 150 students, but you submit a request that includes more than 150 students, the request will be denied. If that happens, you will need to modify your request for reimbursement of no more than 150 solutions. If at some point you decide you need to make changes to your approved plan, you need to complete a budget revision and submit the new plan. If the changes are not financial and do not affect the budget, you must still receive prior approval from the department of the changes you're making to your plan. The updates or new plan must be approved before the expense can be reimbursed. Consultants and monitors are reviewing the expenses to the application and budget. Any undocumented deviation could cause an issue if it wasn't pre-approved. As the timeline showed, the Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant does not follow the normal state fiscal year. Therefore, your final expenditure report for this grant is not on the same schedule as other grants you may have from the department. Your final expenditure report is for this grant will be available to you October 1st, but must be submitted by December 30th, 2020. The final expenditure report, or FER, will capture all your final expenses. The budget, project cash request, and final expenditure reports all work together. The system will compare the amounts of the expenditures reported to the amounts already received. If your final expenditure report has more expenses than what you've already received, the CCIP will automatically create a PCR to reimburse you as long as there's available funding. Last slide. There are a couple things I need to share with you. Please note that if you are using USAS Fund 510, be sure to create special cost codes so auditors and monitors can differentiate between the two CRF grants. Again, 510, use special cost codes. For those of you who have not worked in the department's e-grant system, we have various tutorials and guidance on the Ohio Department of Education's webpage. Just search Grants Administration. There, you will find step-by-step instructions and training modules to complete budgeting, project cash requests, and final expenditure reports, as well as any other guidance documents. In addition, we will schedule a webinar that will provide direct assistance to those of you who may be unfamiliar with the CCIP and would like additional information. Now, I will turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it. Thanks for that information. As the final part of our presentation, I want to talk about the reporting for this project. So this is an opportunity for us to understand the effectiveness of utilizing technology throughout the state to allow students to connect to educational resources. We know some of the challenges that schools faced when the initial stay-at-home order was issued and how rapidly you developed plans to keep providing your students with the best education possible under extremely difficult circumstances. We're hoping to learn how this effort affects your students and how we might improve in the future should other emergencies arise. To begin with, we are looking for how many students were affected by the solution funded through this grant. If you purchased devices to take home, how many students were served by those devices? Did hotspots serve households with multiple children, or were they typically given to a single child? Beyond that, we are interested in seeing whatever usage data you also may be able to get from your vendor. Can they give you information regarding data or time spent on the device or on virtual educational resources? Do you have access to that information directly or through management software? We are not interested in specific information tied to specific children, but just general numbers relating to usage. From public Wi-Fi, do you have usage information as to how many unique users access the network? And if you provided your children with devices that tap into Wi-Fi through other programs, how did those devices connect to the public Wi-Fi? And we're also curious to whether you experienced loss or breakage. Did you need to replace any devices for the students? And finally, we're hoping to get some information from the teachers. Did you see classroom participation increase once the devices or other connectivity solutions had been made available to the students? Did they use the provided technology to be more active participants in your classes? A survey will be developed for use with your teachers so that we can review similar data across all affected schools. We're still working on the final details of this reporting requirements and how the reporting will be submitted. You can expect more information on that when it is available. We're hoping that this money makes a difference to your school, your students, and your community. I'm very proud of the team that has put all of this together so quickly and impressed with how quickly all of you were able to put your applications together. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. As I said earlier, due to the number of participants and the nature of the webinar platform, we're requesting that all questions be submitted by email to crfconnect@education.ohio.gov. All questions will be reviewed and the responses will be included in the FAQ on the Ohio K-12 Help webpage devoted to this grant opportunity. Please allow us until next week to collect and collate all questions received so that similar questions can be combined for answering. This pandemic has shown that there's a digital divide in this state. It has shown that we need to work harder to bring broadband resources all throughout Ohio. We want to make sure that all students, regardless of where they live, have access to the educational resources they need to be successful, whether they're in a classroom or at home. This grant is a small step towards that goal. We will continue to work on long-term solutions that expand internet coverage throughout the state. Thank you all so much for participating in this webinar, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on this grant.